Revenge is a dish best served cold. The question is why? Why is revenge a dish best served cold? Because you detach yourself from the experience, which means you can enjoy it, which means to a certain extent you objectify the person you're engaging with when it comes to revenge. If you hate them, if you're angry, if you look at them as a person, one of two things might happen. One, you may not really enjoy yourself. You may not really be able to observe the revenge taking place. But more than that, you might feel sorry for them, in which case you might not do it. In which case, revenge is a dish best served cold. And I think that is a perfect metaphor for our conversation today. We are discussing revenge, nakama. But why is it in the category of mitzvahs? To those of you who do not remember, if we go back to our categories of commandments for Rav Hirsch, we have the category of a mitzvah, which is an act of love. Distinct from chukim, mishpatim, eidos, toiros, mitzvahs are acts of love. Tzedakah, gemilas chasadim, honoring your parents, respect for the authority within Judaism. It's based off your connection to God. It's an act of love towards humanity, an act of love towards the world, an act of love towards God. That's why you keep to it. Mishpatim, I understand. I don't need God for mishpatim. I understand I'm not allowed to steal. But why do I have mitzvahs? Because they are acts of love. Remember, our commandment structure for Rav Hirsch fits into one of three categories: love, justice, or education towards love and justice. But how does this work? How does the commandment of vengeance fit into love? And I think our point is quite clear. It's an act of love. Why don't you live out revenge? Or more importantly, the justification for revenge is clear. Justice. Justice. Look what they did to me, and look what I will now do to them to balance the scales, the cosmic scales of justice. Is that not a Jewish value? And let's really nail this down, because often a conversation about revenge ends up being abstract. Oh, they did this to you. Let's really be down to earth. They badmouthed you to a school, and now your kid can't get into school. And now your kid's at home. And now you project into the future the suffering you're going to experience and the stunted growth of your child, God forbid. And now you look at the person who did it, and now the opportunity arises to balance those scales. They asked for money. You lent them money. Then you were struggling, and they didn't lend you money. And now the tables have turned once again. Or you invested, and he lost your savings. The savings that you had so much planned for, and he lost it. But it was worse than that. You found out it was a scheme all along. But there's nothing you can do. And now the opportunity arises to balance those scales. And you're asked not to. You're asked not to. And why are you asked not to? Because of your relationship with God, not them. God asks you to love them because they're a child of God. The context in which this commandment arises in the Torah is preceding v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your fellow. That doesn't mean you have to love them as a person, but you love their context. This is an idea Rav Hirsch develops in detail. You can't love them in their emotional essence of them. That's not your job. That's not possible. But as a child of God and their surrounding circumstances, that you can, because you recognize they are also a child of God. And they are a child of God that would also call out to God in pain. So why don't we live out nakama? It's not because of them. It's because of you. And we'll develop this in a fuller way, both from the standpoint of Chazal, but also the way the language Rav Hirsch uses, because there's two conversations to have here. Why don't you do it? Because you're expected to love your fellow Jew. And that might not be fair. That might not be easy. But that's the basis for it. In a similar way to the idea of interest. Your family member, so you don't. But if you negate that family member aspect, then it's justice. It's expected. It's commerce. Same too when it comes to revenge. But let's develop this in a bit of a fuller way. The tam, if you will, the symbolism that lies behind the reason why you don't live out revenge. Rav Hirsch distinguishes between the heat of passionate revenge and the cold of the calculating revenge. You have the distinction between a nakama and natira. But from our standpoint, I think it does something to you. And the language Rav Hirsch uses, I think, brings this out. He says you lose the image of God. Now, what does that mean? How can I lose the image of God? I think on the one side, by objectifying the person as being an object of your revenge, you look at them as an object. That's the idea of the Revenge is a dish best served cold, meaning you don't love a child of God. You're distancing yourself from God. But in another way, something that's so central to Rav Hirsch's perspective is that you become determined by something external to you. Your mind, your feeling of self, is determined on another's suffering. You become an object of their circumstances. So in a most basic way, you act towards another as an object of your vengeance, and you are controlled by that. So the two aspects that make us in the image of God, our ability to love and our ability to act in freedom, is usurped by your desire for revenge. And this, in a bizarre, ironic way, is all in the name of God, because it's your job to balance those cosmic scales of justice. And once again, it's easy for me to speak about this because, right now I don't feel the need to live out revenge on anybody. But I want to really try and give over that from a standpoint of empathy, that this isn't easy to hear from a person who's experiencing it. And Rav Hirsch brings Chazal, and I think this is a more meaningful way to experience it. Chazal describe the person who gives into revenge and the person who stands away from revenge. We've described what happens to the person who gives into revenge, how they distance themselves from God on multiple levels. But the person who stands that test, the rabbis describe him as being like the sun, and him who passes a test. What do they mean by that? The rabbis look to every experience we have in life as a test. Now, that doesn't have to be, and it depends on whichever vision of hashgacha you want to use. But regardless of how you understand hashgacha pratit in our lives, you are the one making decisions based off the stimulus that comes in front of you. Their relationship to God is not your issue, but every experience we have is a test. Not a test necessarily that it was orchestrated to be thus, but once you experience it, how you experienced it, that becomes a test. It becomes a question of how you reacted to the event in front of you. And they say a person who can stand the test of revenge is like the sun that blots out the clouds. Now, the sun isn't a hammer that smashes clouds. The sun, by its brightness, shines forth to make the clouds less impactful. And the way you chase away evil in its ideal sense of the word is you be like the sun. You be that example. And you blot away the evil, just to take it in a, if you will, an example, hypothetically. The person who did you that wrong is now in the same situation. And then they see you in your majesty and your dignity, and in your desire to be like God, stand the test. They're expecting you to fail like they did. The evil they lived out to you, they're expecting you to do the same. And when they see you not, you quite literally become the sun to them as the cloud. And that can have one of two effects. But regardless, it will dissipate their evil, either through shame or through inspiration and example. You blot out the clouds, you shine forth through the clouds and make the clouds less impactful by being the sun of example. So we spoke about revenge. We spoke about revenge's basis is in love. And then we spoke about the idea of what happens to you and how the image of God gets withered away by you living out this, ironically thinking that you are the one being in charge of cosmic justice. But it's because of your love of God that you treat his children with love, even when it's hard. And you do not treat them as an object of your revenge or become an object determined by your need to live out revenge. And then the example of the rabbis of the sun and its beams of light and shining forth as example that blots out the evil. As always, thank you so much for taking the time. Have a wonderful week.